Welcome to Superchargers. I'm Daniel Thomas. Let's go. G'day, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. My guest on this episode is Eric G. Eric has written the book, The Power of Personality, and he has helped thousands of people better understand themselves and others through his modern personality typing methodology. There's an awesome simplicity to Eric's method, and during our chat, as an example for you guys, he graciously assessed what I might be, and it turns out I might just be a humped-back whale. Enjoy this one, guys. Let's dive in. Tell me a little bit about your experience in school, high school, because for me, the big thing was there just wasn't a lot of why to what I was learning. It was like, learn this. Whereas if I actually knew sort of the benefit to it or the kind of the bigger things, if someone had said maths is sort of the language of the universe, maybe I would have been more interested. But it was literally like, learn Pythagoras, just learn that and do it for homework. And it didn't give me much motivation at all. So I'm wondering
Right.
what the experience was like for you.
It is a lot. It was this linear kind of approach, right? Where it's like you go to school and you get good grades, and then after that, you can get into a good college. And they're never telling you why you should do those things, like you were saying. And also, really, what's most important, I think, is why it's important for you personally, right? Or at least for me, why it was important for me personally. Like, I don't think there's ever a situation where they're trying to teach us, I guess, intrapersonal intelligence, like kind of like what do we want out of our lives. They're really just teaching you, okay, this is the information that we want to like put into your brain, and then you remember it, and then hopefully it'll help you in the future. And I never really thought of that as like anything worth actually doing. Um, when I owned my education company, I would always tell my teachers, like, if you teach a student everything you know, you're limiting them, right? Because at the end of the day, we progress and we grow. Technology helps us. Like kids who are learning in school now, they have the means to know way more than we would ever had to know when we were younger because of the technology and the potential there. And so if we're just like giving information and telling them specific things, then I do definitely think we're limiting
Yeah, no,
ourselves.
I'm not sure how much schools are currently embracing the fact that kids can find kind of master classes from like real experts and so on. I don't know how, I mean, obviously they're trying to keep up with it, but it's a real game changer.
Oh yeah. I think I think they try. I don't have any children myself, but I have a niece and nephew who are in a school, and it's a fancy private school. So I mean maybe it's a little bit more I wouldn't say liberal, but a little more open and flexible for the teachers to try different things. I worked with a lot of public schools, and that was definitely more of like, you want to reach this level of math, you want to reach this level of language. And I think the way I designed my education and company was definitely more so like, okay, what do you want as a student? Like, and how can you get there? How can like you find more about yourself? Because I thought that was like the most important thing in my journey was discovering what I really wanted to do.
I love that you've got lots of instruments behind you. Was that a thing for you when you were younger? Was there one instrument that you focused on, or?
Yeah, I grew up, I'm such a typical Asian American and Chinese American. I grew up playing the piano, but I love it. So like, and my piano teacher was German because I know you're in Germany, so I just dropped that. And he was I wouldn't say he was strict, but he was very serious. And I kind of love that. And he definitely taught me the piano in a way where he encouraged me to express myself versus like, I think a lot of times kids learn piano and they learn Bach or something and they're just learning like the technique. But I think for me, it was a lot of Chopin and things where you'd really have to like put your stamp on it. So yeah, that would probably be, I mean, I do have a piano behind me right there. I wish I was better at the guitars back behind me. I'm self-taught in
I
those.
think
Yeah, I'm not really as good as I should be.
I think we all do, but that really highlights like just the importance of a good teacher. Like teachers have our passions in their hands, and if you have a bad one, they can really like distance you from something that you. So it's awesome that you had someone who was. It sounds like they were focused on that individual expression, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think also his favorite composer was Chopin, so he liked that I liked to play Chopin, and I think that was part of it as well. He was great, and I sometimes think about all the teachers that I've had, bad and good, and you're
Mm,
right, they have such a huge impact on us, whether we're kids or we're young adults, and like shaping the way we view the world. That I think as a teacher myself, I owe it to my students to really, really try to figure out what they need as opposed to what I think I want to tell them.
mm, yeah. No, that's cool. So how did all this lead to sort of narrowing your focus in terms of personality typing?
Well, the personality types I started early because I always had this weird personality type. It was, how would you say, it was weird passing, for lack of a better term. Like I wasn't like a weird person who'd sit off in the corner and like show how reclusive I was, but I would be that kid who maybe I was around a lot of kids, but maybe inside I kind of felt alone or I felt
Mm,
different. And not everyone's like that, but I think there are a lot of, like, maybe like a third of the population's a little like that. And as I've been working with students, I've found that that's something that's really easily identifiable. And if you identify that, you can look to kind of help those students reach their full potential, because I think a lot of times schools really aren't designed for that. They're kind of designed for like the majority, the majority that does really well and do your homework, like put it all in an organizer, like come to school every day, wake up really early. And, I just wasn't like that. And
I,
so,
I can relate to this out feeling like an outsider, even though you're within the group. Like I was very adaptable, so I could fit in across groups. So I was like friends with the chess guys and with the like more sporty guys. I could sort of fit within these groups, but I didn't sit in one particular one. I was kind of across the board, and that kind of kept me safe in a way, I guess. So I can relate to this like feeling like an outsider, but you're still social and within the groups.
right. Did you ever feel like you weren't fully connected with each group, since you were not a butterfly, but kind of like within each group? So thus you weren't in any specific group?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So this floating across the board, it sort of didn't, to use it didn't kind of niche me down, to use a current term. It didn't put me, yeah, you're absolutely right. It didn't fit me in one particular thing. And then, I was trying to experiment on the drums, and I just had issues with like following authority. So I would never try and book the music room. I would just go in there and try and play the drums at lunchtime until I got kicked out. Whereas if I just put my name on the list, I would have booked a spot. I had this kind of rebel thing going on me, but within me, it's a strange time, high school. Like it really.
But that is what a drummer is, isn't it? Aren't the drummers supposed to be kind of crazy? Like I think of like John Bonham and like Keith Moon.
Absolutely. There's a punk rock ethos, I think, with the drums. For me, it was like, can I be heard? And part of that was, well, I'm not going to sign the book. I'm just going to go in there and try and be heard.
Yeah, I felt that same way too, like you were saying within each group. I mean, I played on my high school basketball team, but yeah, I loved playing chess as well. And, I played an instrument, and I hung out with the quote unquote smart kids, or at least I took classes with them. And I always felt like, oh, I can be part of this, but I'm never fully part of it because I feel like, I was always a little less, not serious enough and too jokey for the smart kids, and maybe a little too bookish for the jocks, and so, like find your
it's
way.
it's funny though. I actually found a social circle that I grooved with more at another high school. And I
Hmm.
ended up spending so much time at this other high school that the teachers actually thought I was a student there. And that was purely so like I was just finding it's funny, I sort of had to step out of my own high school to find like my clan in another high school down the road. So yeah.
I gotta guess your personality type. I feel like I'm getting there just by hearing all this.
I appreciate that. I didn't want to bring it back to me too much, but I'm really
No, no,
fascinated
I love.
yeah,
Oh,
in the unique approach you have to this personality typing. And yeah, I'd absolutely love to have a bit of a look at mine because I've tried a few over the years. Well, what do you think of is it Myers Briggs?
yeah, and
That
MBTI or Myers-Briggs was the first one that I studied back in high school. And I was like, why am I weird? Let me figure this out. And I read up a lot about it, and I really did like it, and a lot of aspects, and followed a lot of the, I guess, the methodology. But over the course of the next like 20 years, and especially owning my own education company, and we'd work with thousands of students a year, I started to see like problems with it. I won't say problems. I started seeing patterns where it didn't totally fit. Like I'm not a huge fan of introversion, extroversion. And I know
Mm,
introversion is like the big thing and there are books on it. But like the big complaint I always get from people who don't like the personality typing stuff is like, oh, but I'm introverted now in this situation, but I'm extroverted in this
mm.
situation. And I'm like, that is totally true. So there has to be a reason why to explain that. And it obviously it's based on context. So with mine, I modulated it, my methodology to be more based on values, like what are
Mm.
our core values? Because I think there is when you see, like, obviously, if you have a core value that you feel is really important, then in those situations, you are going to be more outgoing, you're going to be more outward. And if it's something that you don't feel is that important, then you probably will be a little bit more reserved.
That's
But
awesome and fascinating because core values come up on the show a lot. And we often chat about how they drive a lot of what we do. So it makes perfect sense that, whatever your core values are, they're sort of shaping how you interact with other people in the world.
yeah, and it hurts that, well, I would say it hurts, but it's difficult when like I'd say about half the population tends to share like one single core value, which is like safety and security.
Mm,
And I think those tend to be the majority of elementary school teachers and just teachers in general. And I mean, that's great. I mean, we need that because that's kind of what we build our society on is like safety, security, caution, rules, organization, structure, making sure there's enough toilet paper in the house. Um, but I think sometimes those personality types that don't have that value can feel pressured growing up to maybe having to assimilate to that value, or maybe think if they value something that's different than that, they might feel a certain kind of self-loathing or inadequacy.
do you think those core values are instilled within us or that they're sort of conditioned as we go along?
You know, I don't know where they come from, but I definitely think that they start within us. Like, I'm not a big fan of like when people are like, oh, I'm from this culture, so I'm like this.
Mm,
Because it's like kind of the old adage where if you go to any country in the world, they'll say, oh, our culture is a culture that likes to eat. We love food. I'm like, well, that's every culture, obviously, but like certain people within that culture are definitely going to cook for you, and some will totally not care, you know. And I think in general, I think what cultures do is they have a certain set way that they're used to, and then they impact an individual more so based on the conflict, right? So, for example, like if you are in my methodology, I use animal types for my personality types. So let's say you're a peacock. So I think we can all guess what a peacock type is like. They're very outgoing, they're flashy, they like a lot of physical contact. But let's say you're a peacock type and you grow up kind of in a traditional Japanese household. That culture is not particularly
mm,
known for physical contact. You're going to have problems. It's not like because you're Japanese, you're going to be like, you're going to fit in. In fact, it's going to be harder for you
mm.
uh, versus like the culture making you who you are.
Yeah,
So,
peacocks are very expressive and look at me and showing off the colors and the patterns. So
mhm.
yeah, a much more
Yeah.
reserved culture.
And vice versa. Like I had a friend who was a shark personality type, and they're a lot more into themselves and keeping like their own personal space, but he was Cuban or he is Cuban.
Mm.
And so, in the Cuban culture, Latin culture, it's a lot of touching, it's a lot of hugging, it's a lot of like outward physicality. And he was always just like, no, stay away from me. Like, I do not want people getting in my space.
So
So,
do you find the animal type through the personality testing, or does the person sort of find the animal?
it's no, and I do have a test online because you have to have a test online, right? And it's something that I designed, and I definitely did a lot of user testing. But the reason why I wrote my book, The Power of Personality, was I find like a lot of those personality books kind of start with a test and then you get your results. And then the rest of the book is all prescriptive. Like it's like, oh, you're this type. So here are like 5 chapters on what you should do. And I'm always like, yeah, but what if the test is wrong? Like it's a cookie cutter test. So like, what if the diagnosis is wrong? I feel like the treatment could really be harmful if you type yourself wrong. So my book is designed to teach people to beat the test. So in a sense, yeah, like if you read my book, ideally, you should be able to figure out what personality type you are and what personality type the people around you are after reading the entire book.
which is a great exercise in awareness and developing that muscle of like self-awareness, which is far better than just like here's the information. It's you're giving. It sounds like you're giving people a way to go on with it.
Right. I'm not a huge fan of certainty, right? So people are like, okay, now I know exactly what this person is. I'm like, okay, that's great. But really, it's just to encourage people to like have a lifelong kind of discussion about people
Yeah,
and trying to figure out. And the more you get, more information you get, you might change your mind. You might go, hey, I realized I didn't know this about you. And now that I do know that about you, my impression of you has changed. And I think you're a different personality.
yeah.
So.
So from our discussion so far, I mean, we've only just begun. But what things do you see in me, personality type wise?
Well, so I break out group personality types into 4 packs, and each one of those 4 packs has like a core value. And then within each of those packs, there are 4 animals that share that value, but go about it differently, getting it differently. So 4 times 4, 6. So there's 16 different animal types. And so I'm only explaining that because at least my impression is you're definitely one of the shaman pack. So their core value is self-knowledge, like
Mm.
self-growth, like figuring things out about themselves. And you might think like, isn't that everybody? Doesn't everyone want to know about themselves? I'm like, no, not at all, actually. I mean, I have so many students where that's just not part of what they do. And that I try to teach them a little bit, but I'm also aware that, look, that's not going to be their core value. I think they need to have it a little bit of that, because that's definitely not taught in schools. But so that would be my guess, is you're definitely a shaman. And once again, their core value, just from what you've told me, I mean, you have a podcast about growth and development and values and people discovering themselves, because shamans aren't only concerned with self-knowledge, like discovering themselves, but also helping other people discover themselves.
Mm.
So.
No, I mean that's accurate. That's a big part of my. I've always just had a natural inclination to self-development and self-growth, and even in tough situations, I'm sort of observing and saying how is this going to um, help me in some way, and where's the challenge in this, and where's the growth, where's the growth in every situation. And sometimes it can feel a little bit self-evolved, but no, I've always just had this curiosity, and now that has definitely shifted to, well, how can I help other people on their own journey? So it's, yeah, that's accurate.
Right. And I think in general, that type, I always say like, shamans there's no such thing as a midlife crisis for shamans, because their whole life is a midlife crisis.
That's it.
They're always like thinking like, oh, am I doing this right? There's something wrong with me. Why am I gotta, like, and that's kind of how they are their whole life. So that's why I'm saying, when people have all these like reference, like, oh, the first, what's that, birth order, the oldest child's always gonna be like this, or, once you reach 40, you're always gonna have a midlife crisis. I'm like, that only works for half the population. But of course, half the population is quite a bit of people. And so I think when we see that, we're like, oh yeah, that's how people are. But it's like, no, there's like a lot of other people, different people that act totally different.
It's
But
classic because I've said that exact same thing. I've said I don't feel there's a midlife crisis because I'm permanently doing the self work. Like there's no, there's no
yeah,
point.
right. Yeah, I myself am a shaman as well, so I totally relate. And so that, I mean, we have had similar experiences in school, right? Bouncing around. You're probably a shaman. So certain shamans wouldn't bounce around in their social groups as much, but there are other animal types within the shaman group that would.
Mm.
So, but yeah, so
I,
I know exactly how that feels about like not fully fitting in.
I'm also very much in the I'm a natural storyteller. Like I have a penchant for storytelling, which runs through my family. I'm also
Hmm.
quite consider myself quite intuitive, and creativity is massive. So I'm constantly uh, trying to creative work.
So you're either, okay, then here's my guess. You're either gonna be one of 2 animals within the shaman type. You're gonna either be a baboon or a humpback whale.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and the way I define them and describe them and differentiate them, which is obviously very different than Myers-Briggs. If you were doing MBTI or Myers-Briggs, you'd be like, oh, one is introverted and the other is extroverted.
Mm.
But the way I determine the difference between the two is I always describe, since they're shamans and they're all about self-knowledge and morale. One is if you had a village, one would be the voice of the village, and the other would be the soul. And
Mm.
those are the differences. Like, so, you just have to choose, like, do you feel like you're more the voice or kind of the soul?
Ah, man, that's fascinating. Um, yeah, well, I've always had this, this sort of lion fire being a Leo and um, feeling like a leader and often struggling like I think we said earlier, struggling in we touched on a little bit in terms of struggling when I'm under an authority. I sort of don't operate well. I do in certain circumstances when somebody's literally just kind of guiding me or directing me in terms of do this, I can do that. But I've always felt like I've needed to kind of lead. But I am also uh, a little bit reserved and shy. So it's not like I'm not the person who dominates in the center of the room. I'm on the outside, but I also feel a strong inclination towards being a leader.
Were you more of a daydreamer in school or a class clown?
Daydreamer, still, yeah,
Oh, okay.
daydreamer.
All
Yeah.
right, so you're a humpback whale. I'm
Okay. Oh wow,
and,
that's
and so those are the random questions I tend to use to like determine. But just from experience, those are the ones that have really helped me out. I've noticed like humpback whales, when I've had humpback whale students, they tend to always have these big eyes that kind of zone out from time to
mm.
time and space out, and they kind of daydream and they kind of like float. That's why I called it a humpback whale, because they kind of float through life.
The other thing, I'm also quite multifaceted as a creative. So I'm not sure if do you know the hummingbird woodpecker thing? Have you heard
Oh,
that analogy where it was in a book, but it was where the woodpecker has a task, finishes that task, moves on to the next. The hummingbird floats around to all the different flowers and goes from one thing to the other. And it's frustrated me a little bit in that I'm much more of a hummingbird. I float between a lot of things at one time as opposed to just finishing one thing and moving on.
yeah. I mean, that's a perfect description of a humpback whale.
Wow.
Baboons would do that as well. It's funny because there are two other shaman types, two other animals, but those two animals, even though they love self-knowledge and all that stuff, they would be more like the woodpecker. They would be like good students. They would focus. They would be more organized and structured versus the.
What's your shamanic animal?
I'm a baboon.
Ah,
So thus
right.
I also chafe under authority, but I was more of the class clown in school. So I would joke around a lot and like kind of like say things just to get people to laugh, because to me that was the greatest feeling in the world. If I could get the class to laugh, I didn't care how much in trouble I was. That was totally worth it for me. Um, but
That's
yeah.
interesting. I am still a little bit Tom because I did do that in high school. I remember in
Okay.
drama class I did a sketch, and like I say I was quite shy and reserved, but then I got this reaction from the audience, and it really like I got a laugh from the audience, and it really it like kicked me. Um
Interesting. Well, I mean, they're the most similar. I mean, like if anything, those two types are going to be more similar to each other. So, um, like I guess you could just always read the portraits on the website and see which one you're closer to. But yeah, I always like Anne Frank would probably be like a humpback whale, but or like have you ever seen Dead Poet Society? That's
oh
a
yeah.
great that's a great shaman movie. It has almost all the shaman types in there. So like Ethan Hawke's character, he would have been a humpback whale, and then of course Robin Williams would be the
He's the
baboon.
baboon.
He's the
Of
baboon.
course.
He's just
Yeah,
kind of like,
well,
yeah. So
I relate to Ethan Hawke a lot. So I think the humpback whale.
mm.
And it's awesome that you brought up Dead Poets Society because I often ask guests just, is there a piece of art or a book that's really had a profound impact on you in some way, or even something that you've just seen lately, a series? Is that a film that stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, as a teacher and like working with students, like I definitely, and being a baboon, I definitely try to channel as much as I can of Robin Williams' character. Like I look up to that character quite a bit as a teacher.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though he gets fired at the end of the movie, spoiler. But yeah, it's hard not to like his character,
No,
you
for
know.
sure, for sure. But back on the core value thing. So, do you work with people to like? Are some people just not really aware of what their core values are? And when you find those, do you work with people to kind of Not change them, but embrace them.
Yeah, you know, it's like it's tricky, right? I mean, it depends on the person, right? Obviously, some people have a lot more self-knowledge and more awareness, self-awareness of themselves than others. Recently was at a bar with someone and we were talking personality types, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you said I was this type," and I was like, "Really?" Because I definitely wouldn't have guessed that. Are you sure? You know, and then they kind of fought me on it. They're like, "No, no, I am this type." I'm like, "No, I think you're this one." And they're like, "Why would you say that?" I'm like, "Well." And then I hate that because then I have to like bring up all these things that I observe and I don't, like, then they almost get kind of defensive. And then I'm like, well, because you just spent 30, like half a minute staring at your taco because you thought it had cabbage on it and you were worried about that. And I think some people,
Mm,
like this person in particular, couldn't understand that her core value was clearly safety and security. And her safety and security, she's overly cautious and very scared that she's not supposed to be eating cabbage and it might be on her taco. And she looked at it for 30 seconds to a minute, just staring at it. You know, where other types have been like, oh, great, whatever, I don't care. You know, just eat this thing. You know, and I
uh,
think, yeah.
I love how the behavior speaks. The behavior, the act of like analyzing the lettuce in the taco or the cabbage, that speaks volumes.
Oh yeah, like, and for me, it's always like how someone comes off, right? Because people like we can always rationalize, right? Like if you say, oh yeah, this personality type is more likely to be athletic and be like sports, like someone will just be, oh yeah, I remember when I made my JV team in high school and I was on the 12th man on the bench. Like they'll take any rationalization to place themselves in that. So I think clearly whatever people show outwardly in the first impression is generally the best impression to get.
Mm.
I had another person who fought me on it, and this was bad because I was like, she was like, "Oh, well, why are you saying I'm a beaver type?" I'm like, "Well, beavers are kind of defensive," and she's like, "I'm not defensive." I'm like, "Yeah, but look right now, your arms are crossed like this. That's like a totally defensive position." And then, of course, then she was just like, then she got even more defensive, and I was like, "Look, you asked me, okay? So I'm sorry that I observed that. I noticed that. I do.
He,
That's my job, you know." Like,
she was being defensive about being the beaver,
she was being defensive about being defensive,
being
and
defensive.
yeah, and I'm like, and I'm of course like I have no problem. I'm not saying a beaver is bad. I'm just saying this is the reality, and this is what they value, and this is what their strengths are. They have a lot of strengths, but obviously, as we were talking about, like I think a lot of people aren't that self-aware, and so I of course try to help them with that. And that's probably why I love working with young people so much, just because, especially like my average age that I start with a student is when they're around 11 or 12. So basically, when their parents are kind of like, I do not know what to do with this kid anymore. They don't listen to me and they're just talking back. And I think that's the perfect age where I can kind of start helping them on that path.
Mm. No, that's brilliant. And I don't know how much school actually does that, like, so I
Wow.
think that's all. And especially at that age, if they can have the tools and the knowledge, if the people around them can have those tools and knowledge, and then the child can eventually come in. Why wouldn't we want everybody to bring their unique individual skill sets or just personality traits? Why wouldn't we want everybody to bring those into the world?
Yeah, I think the tricky part with having the difference in personalities be based on values is that I think values are one of those things that we assume that everybody shares. Like I think when it comes to differences, we're very quick to accept, oh, this person's organized and I'm not, or this person's spontaneous and I'm more like reserved and like organized or structured. But I think when it comes to actual value differences, I think that's really hard for people to accept. And I think
Mm.
that becomes the issue, especially when teachers have specific values that they think are really important. And of course, they're having students who don't necessarily prioritize that value. The example I always like to give is, so, we're shamans, right? But gatherers are the type that make about half the population and they value safety and security, make up most of the teachers. Hunters make up a large percentage of the population. They make up about a third. And as hunters, they value like excitement, like visceral sensation. Like they want to get the most out of their life, like physically. And you can see how that would conflict if you have a hunter student and a gatherer teacher, because the gatherer teacher is going to want them to be safe and he's going to always tell them, hey, you need to be careful. You can't take those chances. But the problem is the hunter needs to be able to take those chances. And especially when they're young, when the stakes are low, that's the best way for them to learn. When they get older, if they're never taught to like really take the best chances and be the most shrewd, then when the stakes are high, they could really put themselves in danger. And so, we need firefighters too. We need firefighters. We need Navy SEALs. We need like spelunkers. You need all these people who take risks, calculated risks, and we need them just as much as we need accountants. So
Yeah, that brings me to my question. So, do you think all these different personality types keep society sort of in equilibrium?
yeah, like in the book, since I do the gatherers, hunters, shamans, and the last one pack would be smiths. And so I use that as a metaphor because I just say, imagine a medieval village. And, which ones would you need the most of? We need the most gatherers, right? We only need one shaman to tell us, yeah, hey guys, it's going to rain and you better harvest the crops. But you need like half the village to actually reap all the crops. And then you need about a third of the village, well, more than a third of the village to go hunt. But since hunting is kind of dangerous, hunters die. So there's less of them than gatherers. And then with a smith, you only really need one or two smiths to create the tools that the hunters use to hunt. So I think it makes sense, like in our society, why there's fewer smiths and shamans, because we're not necessarily needed in that large quantity as the others.
That makes a whole lot of sense. Like if you have 10, a group of 10 people, and I've always thought, oh, is it the one in, why, without sounding self-evolved, I'm like, why am I sort of the one in 10? As in, if there's like 10 people in the room, I can see there's out of the 20, there's two that have this similar personality type. But what you're saying makes absolute sense. You need a larger portion of the other types to do the kind of heavy lifting in other areas. And then so that makes sense. It's like, because I think I used to think, why isn't there just 10 shamans or whatever?
You don't want that, because then you can
No.
have all these people questioning themselves and like, I don't know, if this is the right thing. Do you think it's the right thing? And then I don't know. You definitely need some people with certainty, but then you also need people to question that certainty and like kind of like analyze it. And I actually have a hunter student right now who I'm helping her write things for college and for the application process. And she even says, she's like, no, I don't like to reflect. Why would I want to reflect? I want to move forward. I want to constantly keep moving forward, because if I think about the past, then that doesn't let me move ahead. And I'm like, no, I agree. I'm like, that is great for you. However, it doesn't mean you can't reflect a little bit,
Mm.
so let's get a little bit of self-reflection there, because I do want you to continue to move forward, but I also want you to have a good vision of where you want to go. So that way, when you're moving forward, you're moving towards what's going to make you happy versus like all these different paths,
So
so
you, so you being a shaman also, this is a bit of a side note, but do you think you running a little radio station in Hollywood, do you think that was connected to your shaman personality type?
I think it's connected to my baboon type in that,
Sorry, the baboon. Yeah, the
yeah.
baboon.
Well, definitely. I mean, shamans
The-
always are like discovering themselves, right? And as a baboon and a humpback whale, what we share in common too is our discovery is a lot less organized. Where like the other two shaman types, they're called dolphins and pandas. They're a little bit more academic and they're a little bit more planned out with how they're like going to discover themselves. They're a little more bookish as well. Not to say that we don't read, but definitely a panda will read a lot more. Um, but as a baboon, and I'm sure you can empathize, I just was like, oh, like I was working at a golf course at the time, and someone heard me on the mic and calling out names. And I think when I talk slowly, my voice gets pretty low. And he was like, wow, you have a great voice for radio. And I was like, oh, you know what? I will try that. And so I was like, that'd be kind of fun. Like I could learn about myself. Like I'm going to be a host at a radio show. And so I, applied and got the job. And then I started doing that. I did that for about a year and a half, 2 years of interviewing musicians and stuff. That was great. It was so fun.
Oh, awesome. That's really cool. So it was that shamanic self-exploration part of you that sort of drew you to it.
Oh yeah, it was definitely trying to figure like, and I love music. So it's like, and here I got to hear live music every show because we'd have live performances every show. So that was fantastic.
Mm. Now, very cool. It's a tradition on the show to have guests offer some kind of perhaps daily practice or challenge or something that people can try. This personality typing stuff is it's very cool, and I know that when I tell my fiance about our conversation, she's going to want to know what her type is.
Hmm. I
But
can help you. Give me some information about her. I can give you some hints.
oh well, I mean, she's a teacher. Um,
Okay.
yeah, she's a teacher. She's much more of this woodpecker
Okay.
stuff. But yeah, I don't know how much to but is there thinking of this challenge, what would be the first, or is there something that springs to mind to somebody who's curious?
I always, the first step in terms of personality typing, I always encourage my students to do is use fictional characters. Because fictional characters you can practice and like, so, the challenge would be like, well, buy my book or at least research the methodology on my website, but also buy the book. Um, so that you can kind of figure out how to do this process. And then I would say every day, just pick one fictional character that, whether you like them or not, like pick that character and try to type them and figure out what their personality is. And then ideally pick a character, two characters that are in a relationship. It could be any romantic, it could be parental, parent child, it could be boss, employee, but any relationship that has a bit of conflict, and then see if you can figure out what their personality types are, and then start understanding, oh, because this person is like this person is like this. So thus they are conflicting in this way. And I think you do that with fictional characters first, because, once again, those fictional characters won't snap back at you. Then once you start doing that every day, then maybe you can start doing that in your real life with real people.
That's because, like you said earlier, having an awareness around others helps you hone that skill for
Oh yeah,
yourself. Yeah,
100%.
no, that's
I
really
think
cool.
I think sometimes we get so used to thinking within ourselves, which is why it's so hard to have any bit of self-awareness sometimes, because we don't compare ourselves to other people. We're just like, oh, I'm me. I know I've known myself for 40 years, so I know what I am. But it's like if you don't compare yourself to the person across from you, then you won't truly know. Because I think a lot of people will be like, oh, I remember someone was like, oh yeah, I love to party. Or no, I remember someone thought they were a humpback whale, just like you. And I asked, the first thing I asked them was like, oh, are you a good, how were you in school? And they're like, I was a great student. They were so confident. I was like, you're not a humpback whale. You're a panda. No humpback whale would say it like that.
Right.
You're a panda. And she's like, no, I'm not. I'm like, okay, give me 1 second. And I had my friend who's a humpback whale come over. I'm like, here, come over here. His name was Daniel. His name is Daniel. I said, come over here and then talk to her about school, your school experience. And the look of shock on her face was just like in her mind, she was like, I would never do the choices he made. I'm like, see, that's the difference, because you're comparing. You think you're like that, but you're not like that, which is okay. But
That's so cool because yeah, having this understanding and this awareness of how we all operate in this world, it it would just help no end in terms of careers and how we interact with other people, having this understanding. Because I've always thought, oh, like, my son is quite sensitive, intuitive as well. And I've tried to kind of manage him existing around more and using the term extrovert here, but more out, and I can see, and I would just worry for him how he's going to be able to exist in this world as a similar personality type to me, but not the same, obviously. But just having this awareness and these tools, like we've said, it just has no end to the benefit.
right, especially for someone, if he has that intuitive, sensitive personality type, at least he knows that. So then, because the worst thing for that type is to like have a lot of outward influences telling them that there's something wrong with them,
Mm.
right? And then it's just going to mess you up inside. So at least knowing that this makes the person feel less weird, even if those people don't necessarily respect their differences, at least this person respects their differences.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
ideally, those people would as well on the out, but you know,
yeah. But no, I really your methodology, it's just it sounds very cool. I'd like to dive more into it. Where can people find the book and your work?
so the book's available anywhere you can buy books. So, Amazon, of course, is, I guess that's the go-to. But yeah, it's available like Barnes and Noble. And I mean, I know you're in Germany. I don't know what online book retailers there are there, but I'm sure it's actually gonna the German edition is coming out in September, actually.
Oh,
September
cool. So there's a
24th.
awesome. So there's a translated.
There is. Yeah. I mean, I actually saw the cover and I was like, oh, that one has like animals on it. That makes sense. But
Oh,
yeah, like
they did the cover.
yes, my German publisher did. I mean, I didn't do any of these covers, right? I just say yes, that's great. So, it's just but the German publisher had a different cover and obviously it's in German. But yeah, like you can find my book on Amazon and anywhere that you buy books. And you can find me on like utopiaproject.com. Well, actually, you can take the test at utopiaproject.com, and that's like like YOU, like YouTube. But my actual site, and this is weird, I have two websites, I know it's weird, is projectutopia.com. So it's in reverse. And it was just because I started the first site, and the first site is more of a WordPress site. So it has articles and it has a test that you can take. But the other site is more of like kind of like a centralized site for everything.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you diving into my personality type as well. It's fascinating, especially as someone who's very interested in self
Oh
reflection
yeah.
and development, have been all my life. So really, and also, like I say, having tried a number of these tests and sort of finding little bits from each, but never fully being like, oh wow, that really makes sense. Like this can help me, operate on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you said that, this podcast kind of got started when you went on a hike or you hiked up a mountain,
Mm,
right? And it's funny because humpback whales are the most connected personality type to nature, like in terms of
mm.
like spiritual side of it, not necessarily like jumping in a cold stream or something, but more so like just being in nature is quote unquote natural to them. Like
Mm.
there's a certain spiritual connection, and generally humpback whales feel it the most. So
Do you even go as far as like diet and things like that based on the personality type, like recommendations for
you know,
dietary
I'm
stuff?
You know, I'm not a dietitian and stuff. I would say that in terms of personality types, physical bodies tend to kind of fit certain personality types often. And like when we think of a hunter, like the hunters tend to be more wiry and I won't say smaller, but I'd say more athletic and thinner. But then it just depends. But I don't necessarily do the diet, even though like if you have a peacock, peacocks are overconsumptive. So, if they're athletic, they'll be like someone who's like extremely ripped and strong and buff when they're like playing a sport. And then the moment they retire,
They
there's a high likelihood that they get to be a little bit bigger. I think of like Robert Baratheon. I don't know if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, but
yeah, enough. Yeah, enough,
oh, Game of
enough.
Thrones is so great for personality because there's
Yeah.
so many well-rounded characters and you can see the conflicts within each one.
Mm.
The humpback whale character is Bran Stark's humpback whale,
Ah,
a
okay.
couple others too. Um, but yeah, when I think of a
Uh,
peacock, I think of Robert Baratheon, like he was supposed to be really ripped and buff, and then when he became king, then he just
but I love this personality typing in fiction characters also in terms of developing characters for stories as well, thinking what personality type is this person that it's very informative in terms of characters.
right. I mean, the funny enough, this is really random, but my academic background is actually in screenwriting. So I studied
Ah,
screenwriting in college, and before I wrote this book, I was actually writing pilots and screenplays. And then a friend of mine told me I should write this because we were talking in a bar, and everybody like loves talking about this stuff. And she's like, everybody's talking about this. Why don't you write a book? I'm like, no, I'm just gonna like just keep writing my pilots. And so then she took the ideas from the book and put it into the television episode that she was writing. And I was like, oh, okay, well, now if you're gonna do that, then I think I probably should because it's like pretty popular. And so I did. And so
interesting.
that's what the book
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
So
Wow. No, very interesting. Is there anything we haven't covered?
no, I mean, I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah, I think we
Unless
covered
you,
it.
I mean, unless you have any questions for me in terms of like, you want me to type your wife? I can, or try. I'm sure you don't want to give out a lot of information though, but I will
Yeah,
say teachers tend to like, if she's more structured, I'm sure if you read the portraits, you'll be able to figure it out.
quite structured. Yeah, but there's a lot of cultural things there too, being Germany. There's
Mm.
structural aspects of, um, yeah. But I
And she
might,
likes it. She
yes,
advocates it. Oh, okay.
yes, and the structure she gives others is really helpful as well, like her
Mm,
students
okay.
and things. This this structure, but she's also very like present on holiday. You know, she can, like when we go on holiday, she can be very just instantly on the holiday and not worrying about like, whereas I find it's a bit harder for me to get present. You know, I'm always ticking over about something.
Ah, well, she definitely seems more concrete, like kind of
Mm,
like it's like, oh, I see this. I'm like in the space that I'm in.
yeah,
Uh, Shamans and Smiths sometimes have an issue with that, where they're like always in their own heads or their own feelings, and sometimes they lose a connection with the stuff that's happening around them. That can be a
right,
problem.
right.
Yeah,
In relationships. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yes, yes.
Cool. Just that finally, did birth dates and things come into play? Like, you know, some of the traditional
Oh, like
Eastern philosophies, you know,
the
the
zodiac
years,
and
yeah, and dates.
people, I mean, have asked me about that. I have a friend who does like the zodiac stuff, and we, it didn't make sense to me, even it's like scientifically, because obviously people who are born on the same date as me are not going to have necessarily the same personality as me. But I did say like, oh, if you are this animal type, then the description of this animal type is similar to this zodiac sign.
Mm.
So like we kind of like matched up zodiac signs with animal types, and we kind of did that. But
What's your zodiac? So,
my zodiac sign is nothing close to a baboon. My zodiac sign is a Cancer.
okay.
Yeah, and I know people have asked me, "Oh, but what's your moon sign?" I'm like, "My moon sign is a Cancer," and they're like, "Oh, okay, what's your rising sign?" I'm like, "Okay, my rising sign's a Scorpio," and they're like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." And I'm like, "Okay, like, but like you hit like 2 out of 3 is, you know." But a lot of people think I'm a Gemini, and that's probably what a baboon is closest to in terms of description is probably a Gemini.
Okay, and a humpback whale.
Ooh, I forgot. I had that list in my head because we were coming up with one, but I forgot what the humpback whale was.
Yeah, no, understandably, there's many things. I'll have to check it out. No, well, Ari, I really appreciate your time. It's been fascinating.
Oh, this has been fun.
There you go, guys. Honest ratings for the show on Apple are appreciated. If you have a guest suggestion, please feel free to reach out on my website at danielthomas.co. I'm also on social media at Mr. Dan Thomas. Catch you on the next episode.